Shalom, Erev Tov, good evening, good afternoon from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Lowell Joseph Gallen, the founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in New York State in 1981, and now celebrating our 40th anniversary. I would like to welcome our viewers and listeners worldwide to this afternoon's program in our Root and Branch Association Limited English Language Conference and Lecture Series, broadcasting from Jerusalem, Israel, and now celebrating the start of our second quarter century. We thank, as we always do at the beginning of each program, the Orthodox Union Israel Center for hosting the first quarter century, from January 1995 until December 2020. And then everything was closed down for a year starting in March. I had to learn how to use Zoom. And we especially thank the Educational Director Emeritus and Founder and Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the Torah Tidbits, Phil Chernovsky, for making us so welcome all those years, and his wife Tony Chernovsky and scheduler Itarachel Russek. Today is the 23rd day of May 2021 in the Gregorian calendar, and let me just double check here, the 12th day of Sivan 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. We are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, hill of the priests, Givat Hananiah, Abu Tur, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction and stand forever, as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Please see the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48. And now, normally I would introduce Dr. Les Glassman, our program chair, but he's probably doing a root canal or a crown for somebody who's a dentist. You need your teeth fixed, come to Jerusalem, he'll take care of you. So I will do it myself. We're very happy to have old friend, Mrs. Susan Rosenbluth, founder and editor-in-chief and publisher of the Jewish Voice and Opinion of Teaneck, New Jersey. Where's it, Englewood? That's Teaneck. Englewood? Teaneck. And I want to personally thank Susan. In the very beginning when I got going with Root and Branch, she recognized there was something worthwhile about it and gave us a lot of press coverage. Unfortunately, some of the people like Corey Christensen are no longer up there in Olam Haba. And I thank her very much for all that press coverage of the ideas. It's basically an idea nursery that we've been planting all these years. And now, without further ado, Susan will be speaking about Jewish journalism. Now I'm going to hand the floor over to Susan, and she's going to talk to us about that. Just a second. Wait a minute.
I unmuted.
Good. Go ahead.
You ready?
Yes.
Good morning. For here in Englewood, New Jersey, it is good morning. And as I was mentioning to your host a while ago, it was a time when anytime I was speaking to people in Israel, I would start by asking them, how are you? How are you doing? How is everybody there? Please know that we here in the United States, our hearts are panting on the ground with you. And this morning, I had somebody text me already, I guess for me it's morning, and say, I think it's time for us here in Israel to ask you that question. How are you guys in America doing? And it occurred to me that my friend was absolutely on target. Things are happening here in the United States that we have not seen before. That's not to say there has never been anti-Semitism in America. Nobody knows better than you that of course there has been. There have always been incidents. What we haven't had, what's new, is an aura. What we haven't had is an environment of anti-Semitism. What we haven't had before is the insecurity, the fear that we might not be protected by those that we have always counted on to protect us. Sometimes because the people we've counted on to protect us simply aren't there anymore. When the rule has come down to defund the police, defunding the police means a rally like there was in New York the other day, and there was nobody there to protect people. There was an incident that got very little publicity here in America. I don't know if it got publicity in Israel. In Florida, Bal Harbor is a very popular place. Bal Harbor, Surfside, Florida, very popular with the Jewish community. They've become kind of the foodie go-to place because we used to think there were more kosher restaurants per square inch in Teaneck, and I'm not sure that, I think we've been overcome. I think Surfside has, and areas in South Florida have overtaken us with kosher food. So it's not surprising at all to know that people would go down there for Shavuos. Certainly the powers that be in that area have always welcomed the Jewish community. We're tourists. Synagogue, there are two synagogues facing each other virtually, both wonderful. Chabad, which calls itself the shul, which is great. It's almost a minion factory. And there's a young Israel there, and more shtibels than you can shake a fist at. Lots and lots of them. A family walking on Collins Avenue in Bal Harbor, and obviously this was I hate the term, but let's call it a modern Orthodox term. I know what I mean by that. But the family was walking, and a car with a group, as they put it in the paper, of Middle Eastern looking men, they don't mean looking like our host here, stopped, screaming at them with children there, threw garbage at them, and what they were screaming at them had the new mantra that people who do this with Jews here is, we're going to rape your women. Now, an amazing thing happened in Florida. This was on Shavuos. Behind the car, there was another car, obviously not owned by Jews, not being driven by Jews. It was a Floridian who came out, because this is Florida. You're allowed to carry concealed weapons in Florida. And a Floridian came out with his gun and certainly menaced the Middle Eastern type drivers in the car that were attacking the Jews. The whoever they were who were in the car drove off, because this was no joke. This was a good old boy from Florida who was not fooling around. And what's amazing is that every streetlight in Bal Harbor is also a camera. So obviously something happened. The drivers came out. It certainly was caught on camera. We will assume that so was the license plate of the people who were attacking the Jewish family. So we are now waiting to see what law enforcement in Florida is going to do about it. It's very, I can tell you as a journalist, and I consider myself, and we will get into a second what I consider Jewish journalism. It's very, very important for the book to be thrown at the people who did this, at the people who were menacing the Jewish family. There's a tendency that we all have to say, well, nothing that terrible happened, they're okay. Thank goodness the guy behind them chased them away. The answer is that if we don't do anything, we send a message. If law enforcement does nothing, it sends a message. If the judges do nothing, it sends a message. It's very, very important for the full extent of the law to come down heavily, whatever it is, on these individuals. Because if you don't, we're sending a message that it can be repeated. That is sort of what we had in New York. There was a rally almost with impunity. The pro-Palestinian group, the anti-Israel group, the anti-Semitic group was allowed free reign, and nobody stopped them. I don't even know if there are enough police in New York to stop them anymore. Some of it was caught on tape, so we're hoping that some of it. I believe that there has been. I think when it happened in California, there have been arrests already. I have not gotten wind of arrests that have been made in some of these other incidents, and these are only the ones that are making the news. In Teaneck, New Jersey, yesterday on Shabbos, there was a pro-Palestinian rally held at City Hall in Teaneck. And normally, most of us would have said, so what? So they'll have a free speech. Let them have their pro-Palestinian rally, and we'll have ours, and we'll see what happens. Knowing that nothing would happen. We'd have ours, they'd have theirs, ours would be bigger, and police and the powers that be would restrain them. Now, as it turned out, that's exactly what happened. There were a lot of people. However, no one could tell the Jews in Teaneck, feel free to go and take and participate in your normal Shabbos activities. Children were not allowed to roam around Teaneck, Jewish children, on Shabbos, this past Shabbos. It was clear that they had to be home. There was a great deal of security at every synagogue because nobody knew what was going to happen. And the fear was palpable. And that shouldn't be. And the minute that starts to happen, what do they sometimes say? History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. We don't have the government. No one is going to call America at this point Nazi Germany. We don't have the government. We don't have government-sanctioned entities who are doing this. But if the government doesn't come in and clamp down hard, then it might just as well be. It's exactly what we have in the United States right now with free speech. The government isn't going to stop anybody from talking. You can get up and talk in America. They're not going to put you in jail. But we have big tech that has come out and is engaging in the 21st century version of book burning. If you will, you want to change it around and say what the Nazis did in the 1930s was the 1930s version of cancel culture. It was an attempt to say, and it's exactly the same thing. Books that are not that the woke, whatever that means, and I still haven't gotten a really good definition, but I think it's like pornography. You may not be able to define it, but we all know it when we see it. When something goes counter to what the woke leaders want, it's canceled. The idea that a major book company would cancel, with a contract, would cancel a senator's book because it didn't like that he had participated in a perfectly legal ceremony on Capitol Hill in the Senate in which he challenged a vote, and because of that, his book was canceled. It's no different than book burning. The difference is that he was not put in jail because the government has not yet decided to tweak or change the First Amendment, but his book was canceled, and he did find another publisher, thank goodness, and it's out there. In this day and age, if he had even wanted to, he could have self-published it. The amount of publicity he had because of what the original book publishers did may very well make his book a bestseller, much to everybody's chagrin. I certainly hope it will. But I'm someone who thought that Solomon Rushdie, when his book was canceled, when it was pulled back because they were afraid in the 1980s of threats from Iran, I thought the whole thing might have been a publicity stunt because it took a book that probably would not have been a bestseller and it made it a bestseller. So you never know where things are going to end up. But we are watching something that is very different. And I think it's going to come to a head in America in 2022, because the elections in 2022 are going to be very, very telling. They're going to let us know what is going to happen here in the future. I don't know. I don't know whether the powers that be right now have learned how to game the system well enough so that the United States is on its way to becoming a one-party system. It might be. I don't know. We will know as we watch the election. If we watch the election and we see that it's the normal state of affairs, that is, the pendulum swings back and forth between the two parties, I'll say to you, we've got a chance. If it doesn't, it means somebody has learned how to game the system. And it also means that those of us who are looking at things very carefully, it might be handwriting on the wall. Let me get in, because that takes me just where I want to be, where in defining what I think of as a Jewish journalist. A Jewish journalist is not a Jew who happens to be a journalist who just happens to be a Jew. That you can find all over the world. Jews like to write, and we turn up in the oddest places writing for countries where you say, what is he doing there? What is she doing there? So just being a Jew who happens to be a writer does not qualify for my definition as a Jewish journalist. For me, a Jewish journalist is a journalist who is writing for the Jewish community specifically. Often that means writing about Jews, but not necessarily. It's writing about things that affect the Jewish community as Jews. And I will tell you that using my definition, Jewish journalists are the luckiest journalists in the business. Why do I say that? I think as a writer, you'll back me up on this, that when you write something, your audience will usually give you 1 or 2 sentences. If they've picked up your stuff already, they'll give you 1 or 2 sentences. If you're boring them, if they're not interested, they're going to put you down and turn on the television. So, or turn to something else. You have about 2 sentences, no more than that. If you're engaged in Jewish journalism, you've got your audience from the get-go. Is there anything I could write about that has to do with Jews anywhere that you're not interested in? The answer is no. You are interested in anything that I'm going to write about. I don't care whether it's that a new kosher restaurant has opened in Buenos Aires. I don't care whether it means something terrible. If a Jew gets hurt in Madrid, we're going to bleed in Teaneck. If what happened in South Florida was a Jewish family walking on the street in Shavuos, it's going to affect the Jews in France. When you're engaged in Jewish journalism, your audience may not be the same as it is if you're writing for one of the mainstream media papers, but your audience is with you. You know that whatever you're going to write about, they want to know about. They're interested in it. They want it because you're writing about Jews as Jews, and you're writing about Jewish communities, things that affect Jews everywhere. So I always think we're in we're in a very lucky position in terms of our audience. Now, like journalists everywhere, we have a lot of room, a lot of elbow room, have to have it, to decide what we're going to write about. There are wonderful Jewish publications that write only about, what interests Jews as kosher consumers. And that's wonderful. They're fabulous. But they're not going to write necessarily about something that is happening. They're not in terms of politically. I remember the first time that I really found how true this was when I started with the dearly lamented Bergen Jewish News, which was a short-lived publication put out by the Jewish Federation and in Bergen County. And I realized the power of what we were doing with the audience that we were given when I received a phone call one afternoon from a woman I think you're familiar with. May her memory be a blessing, Hadassah Marcus. Hadassah Marcus was a little woman who was an activist like I had never met before. She called me in the mid 1980s at my office because she had a problem. She had come into a little bit of money from an inheritance, and she decided she wanted to plant some trees through the Jewish National Fund in Israel. And she knew where she wanted her trees. She took her couple of $1,000s, which was a lot more in the mid 1980s than it would be today. And she said, I want to plant trees in Shiloh. And they said to her, no problem. Took her money and went off. And months later, whatever it was, she had the experience of going over to Shiloh to look for her trees. And of course, there were no trees. And that is, it's almost a joke. You know, you call up JNF, you say, where are my trees? And very often you got things like, well, it takes time for trees to grow. They're planted. Take a look at the plaque. They knew very well how to take care of would-be disgruntled donors. And in this case, they kind of strung her along until they finally said to her, oh, Mrs. Marcus, we can't do it. It's against the law. You can't do it. The State Department won't let us. State Department won't let you plant in Shiloh? What? I mean, there were a few things we knew already. We knew that donating to anything over the Green Line, the so-called Green Line, was permissible because we certainly knew, I knew firsthand that the Quakers were making sizable donations to the Arab community in Hebron. We don't have rules that they can do it and Jews can't. Made no sense. So as a journalist, I called the State Department. And the State Department told me in no uncertain terms that it was perfectly legal. They thought it was an obstruction to peace, but as long as it fit the guidelines, that is, it was being donated to an American charity to be done there for peaceful purposes, planting trees, it absolutely was legal, and it certainly was tax deductible. That became a false mantra that was used by many of the major American Jewish charities. If you wanted to give to anything that was over the Green Line, either UJA or the JNF sat there and told you, if we do it, your donation will not be tax deductible. We can't do it. That was not true. And we had, it was simply not true. And that was confirmed. I remember making a phone call to Al D'Amato. Remember Senator Al D'Amato of New York? I called him up and I said, will you explain why this is being said? And he wrote actually a very, very good essay on why it was not true. It was simply, you can do it for other reasons that you don't want to give, but don't blame it on it being not tax deductible, because it is. Well, Dossie really was in going after this. And of course, by this time, there were many people who were learning that the Jewish National Fund would, at that time, it has changed. I'm very happy to tell you it has changed. But at that time, the Jewish National Fund were refusing to give over the Green Line. Not only that, but they were using on their lovely pushkas, if you remember, the blue and white pushkas that many of us grew up with from JNF. Part of their branding was to have a map, the map of Israel, which of course included Judea, Samaria, and Gaza on their map. And their logo read, "We cover the good earth, all of it," which of course was not true, because if you gave to JNF, you couldn't give to all of it. So they were using this as a logo, using this as their slogan, and it wasn't true. We went to court, and it became fascinating. In court, the first court would always fine for the activists. It was false advertising. You couldn't do it. The organization JNF would then appeal it, On appeal, the first court was always overturned. And at which point the activists would go back to court. They'd go back to as high a court as we could get to on this, and we always won, hands down. At one point, JNF was forbidden to use their logo. Because what they came out with at one point, they couldn't use the issue of it not being tax deductible. So what they did was they said, which was the truth, we don't want to. Nobody is going to force us to give where we don't want to give. And the answer to that is you're absolutely right. But you have to make sure people know that. And you can't use a map of all of Israel and say we cover the good earth and then say we don't want to give here, here, and here. You can't do that. And that was pretty much the state of affairs until the early 90s. The early 90s, an amazing thing happened. JNF, by the way, ran into tremendous trouble because of that. The court cases got publicity. I was writing about them, and the stories were being picked up. And for a while, JNF couldn't get a breakfast in areas where there were activist Jewish communities. By the time we were into the early 90s, unfortunately, and I really mean unfortunately, that was getting to be the state in the Orthodox community. When you weren't in the Orthodox community, unfortunately, this was kind of all filtered down, and JNF maintained its favor with that. But where people were giving to Israel, the Orthodox community could not be ignored. What is the old thing? Statistics don't lie, but liars often do statistics. So if you start to see what started to happen in the 90s when they started coming out with polls, it was at they couldn't get past the Orthodox community is only 10%. You can't worry about them. They're only 10%. Of course, first of all, the one thing they were denying to put in altogether is that 50% or more of the Jewish community, of the American Jewish community, was not identifying with anything. They were gone. Maybe the pollsters would accept if you belong to a JCC because you like to work out there. They said, oh, you're part of the organized Jewish community. That's all they were doing. There was self-identifying, but there was no there was no allegiance to any group. There was certainly no synagogue attendance. And so when you started by taking 50% off right from the top, and then you started to have to look at the size of the communities, you began to realize that something was happening demographically. And we've seen that in the United States. Demographically, something is happening big time in the Jewish community in America. No one can keep up with our numbers. So you had the JNF, because it had started already in the 90s. As I said, they couldn't even get a breakfast in some areas. People just weren't coming. So something amazing happened. Ron Lauder became president of JNF. And maybe 2 weeks after he became president, there was an announcement made. The Jewish National Fund's newest project was going to be to plant a ring around Jerusalem. Trees all around Jerusalem. Donate. Now, what do you know about geography? Most people don't know anything about geography. Geographically, you cannot plant a ring around Jerusalem unless you go over the Green Line. It can't be done. There's just no way to do it. Therefore, I remember sitting at the press conference and they're talking about the ring around Jerusalem and people going like this. And I said, how are you planting over the green? How are you planting a ring around Jerusalem without going over the Green Line? At which point the spokesman looked at me and he said, well, of course we're going over the Green Line. And that raised a ruckus and that ended the problem. At that point, Jewish National Fund was going over the Green Line. You didn't have to find all kinds of strange ways to get around it. It's what was happening. And writing about it, I realized how dramatically involved the Jewish community was with this. It was, for the Jewish community, it was it was like talking about members of their family. If you were going to say, I remember a case where I think our local federation had been supporting a program in Jerusalem, very nice after school arts and crafts program, and everything was lovely. It was funding it until, to get more room, because the woman who was running it was becoming so successful, she needed larger quarters. She was able to find them in one of the neighborhoods of Eastern Jerusalem, and all of a sudden her funding stopped. And there were those of us who said, "What are you doing? You know, we're going now to determine whether a Jew can get funding from a Jewish charity depending on where he or she happens to live or work." I mean, if anybody else were doing that, we'd be screaming bloody murder. We're going to do that to ourselves. And when you write about things like that and people see it, they hate it. As long as the federations controlled the Jewish newspapers, they were delighted, because it was still business as usual, and look how wonderful we are, and we all love Israel, and we won't talk about these other little things. The minute they started to be talked about, things happened. People tackled it within the Jewish community, within the concerned Jewish community. They tackled it in a variety of ways. One, of course, was simply to say, I'm through and I'm not giving them any money, and that's all there is. But others got involved and took up positions of leadership. And a lot of it was changed, not all of it. Some of it is still going on. But we cannot be ignored. It's not a position that they can ignore anymore. And I think that is a triumph of Jewish journalism. People who are writing about Jews, for Jews, very often, increasingly coming from the observant Jewish community. Because increasingly, it's the observant Jewish community that is taking the lead in all of this. You're old enough, like I am, to remember when the Israel Day Parade was an all-inclusive event. You would be there, and there were just as many covered heads as uncovered heads in the parade, on the sidelines. I'm going back in the 70s. It was an all-inclusive event, very much the same as, if you remember, our Solidarity Sundays. Solidarity Sundays were our efforts for Russian Jewry before the gates were open. And something happened by the time we were into the late 80s, early 90s. You looked around and they became Orthodox Jewish affairs. There were no uncovered heads. You go look at today, at the most recent of the Israel Day parades. In the most recent of the Israel Day parades, you'll have, I don't know, maybe Hadassah will mount a float, and they'll have a group of people waving. You might have a conservative synagogue that will have a float, and then you'll have 6 blocks of yeshiva this or yeshiva that. I mean, you'll have 12 blocks of Orthodox organizations. They're the ones who are out. Take a look at who is lining the streets. There are no uncovered heads anymore. It doesn't exist. It's just not there. There's a smattering, but it's demographically, that's what's happening. And you know who really realized that very early on? Do you remember our friend Colette Avital when she was at the consulate in New York? She came in at a time when the biggest thing that happened after the Israel Day Parade. The Israel Day Parade would not be on Sunday, and after the Israel Day Parade, we had what Joe Frager and the National Council of Young Israel and people called the Israel Concert in the park. They took over the Delacorte Theater, and people would go from the parade right to the concert. And the concert was a concert cum rally for Yehuda v'Shomron. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of people who had come from the parade, who went there. It was free and an amazing event. Colette Avital, it bothered her so that she decided to take the New York Armory on 66th Street and to have what he called the Israel Day Fair. Now, of course, she did not know her audience. She had people there. People were going to be selling things. It looked like it was going to be a wonderful event. But what did she do? She charged for it. I think it wouldn't have mattered, but so she decided she was charging very little. She was going to charge, I think it was maybe $6 a head, maybe $8 a head. I don't remember. But she didn't know who her audience is. Who was going? Let's take a normal, a not atypical family. A mother and a father, they may have had a baby in arms and 3 kids marching in the parade. You've got a family of 6. Are they going to the free concert, or are they paying $8 a head? I'm going to pay close to $50 to go to her fair. And what were they going to do? Were they going to go inside to the fair when they could sit outside and have this concert, which was mirroring the political feelings that they had, sentiments that they had? What were they going to do? Somebody asked me after it was all over, they said, was her fair a success? I said, I'll tell you what, let's see if she does it next year, and then we'll know. And of course, the answer was she was never done again. The concert is still going on. But those were the kind of stories that only Jewish journalists would tackle, because they were not of interest to the New York Times. They may have if the New York Times could find the angle it wanted, but for Jewish journalists, it was our story, and still is. You're muted.
Yes, I unmuted myself, and I guess it's time for me to put myself in a gallery view so I can ask questions and comments. I have so many and I don't know where to start. Well, first of all, what year did you found your paper, and that's going back for like 40 years or something. What demographic changes have you seen in the Jewish community in terms of Jews? This percentage of Jews who identify in some way, let's leave that undefined, as Jewish, back then and now, is the numbers going down or up, or it's changing, the definitions?
Great question. As I mentioned, I started in the writing for Jewish newspapers in the late 70s. At that point, it was mostly what I will call the secular Jewish presses.
Okay.
Jewish presses that were not, we were still writing for the Jewish community. You had them all over the country. American Jewish Press Association, which still is very active. Mm-hmm. And this was, the community rarely had more than one newspaper. In Bergen County, we had one newspaper at that time, and I was writing for it. In the mid-'80s, the Federation decided it wanted its own newspaper. Now, this presented me with a problem. The idea, if it was going to be Tweedledum and Tweedledee, then it felt to me that it was a charity putting its thumb, maybe for advertising, putting its thumb on the scale that was going to hurt a private business, which felt to me somewhat unethical. I didn't particularly like it. On the other hand, the newspaper that was here was decidedly left-wing. It was a left-wing publication. And I said to them, because they came to me and they wanted me to work for them, I said, I can see point in it if this is going to be a different editorial tack. Pre-war Warsaw had, I think, 12 dailies or more, 12 Jewish dailies. I said Bergen County could have two weeklies if we were going to be different. If it wasn't going to be Tweedledum and Tweedledee, if our position was going to be unabashedly pro-Israel, we weren't going to apologize to anybody because light was on our side and we were going to take it from that position. If we were going to have certain standards that we were going to abide by, I said, I really don't have any problem with there being two newspapers. I think it's great.
Right.
And that was fine for a while, except it didn't last very long. And I had been writing for them. And what I recognized was that the secular Jewish community liked the Orthodox community as long as we were singing and dancing. when we sang and danced and we talked about culture, and they could picture us as old men studying Torah and old ladies who were baking cookies and challahs. They loved us. We were great. The minute we had something to say, they didn't like us so much anymore. And they didn't like us so. And there was no way to get our voice out. Our voices were being muffled because these were the only publications there were. Yes, thank God there was the Jewish press coming out of Brooklyn, but it was not speaking at that time. It's a different paper now, but it was not speaking to a lot of us. Who were us? We were, at that time, young, college-educated professionals. We were what the secular Jewish community despised. They couldn't handle it. They could handle the old men and women who were doing what they wanted. They could handle what almost every Jewish sociologist was saying in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, that the Orthodox community was dying. What you were going to have was the conservative community was the largest. Living in America, religion was not the major part of their lives. It was part of it. They were very interested in building what they called then shuls with pools. You know, there was a swimming pool, you could swim there, you did whatever you wanted. And the Orthodox were obviously going to die out. And you know what happened? It didn't. What happened was the day schools were born. And the day schools were they did not look like the old pictures coming out of the shtetls in Europe. They were kids who were dressing the way dressing, if you will. They weren't wearing garb. They weren't distinctive, except they did have tzitzis, often out of their shirts. They wore kippas. The girls began to wear skirts that were longer. They were something, as I'm sure many of your audience members will know, and you know, they could be the chicest, most fashionably dressed people in the room if you went someplace, but they still adhered to the religious laws. Where they were, what do they say? Statistics may lie, kosher pizza shops don't lie. You don't get kosher pizza shops unless there are people buying in them. So when you had communities in which there became a plethora of kosher restaurants, they were servicing this growing community that the secular community said didn't exist.
Right.
In about the year 2000, there was a poll taken, and the poll was very interesting. It was supposedly done by all the federations across the country in America. And in this poll, I mean, they came out the same thing, Jews are 10%, stuff that didn't even make sense anecdotally anymore. But then they went too far. They might have if they just held it at that, they might have gotten away with it, but they didn't. What they did was they came out and they said that 80%, crazy number, 80% of the Orthodox Jewish community supported the Oslo Accords. They really said that.
Up with that.
I'm looking at that and I'm saying 80% of the Jewish community can't decide which Chinese restaurant to support. You're going to sit there and tell me that 80% of the community is supporting the Oslo Accords. At which point, as a journalist, I called the people who did the poll, and I said, "Could I please see the raw data? I'd love to see how you got this number. Can I?" And they were very happy to send it to me. You ready? Wait for it.
Okay.
They weren't counting people. They were counting households, so that an empty nester widow, an empty nester widow who belonged to a conservative synagogue, counted the same as a Hasidic family with 18 children. They counted the same. So I mean, the statistics were crazy. I said at the time, you will never, ever, ever see a poll like this again, because they can read the numbers like I can. They know that, please God, every one of those 18 children is going to grow up and is going to please God, and will have his or her own family which may have 18 children. And the
Right.
number, I mean, nobody can
Right.
keep up with numbers like that.
Right.
And I mean, the number, because demographically it's impossible. I was right and I was wrong. Because a few years ago, the Pew people did a poll, did a survey, not of the whole country. They did the exact catchment of the New York Federation's, the catchment area. That would be the 5 boroughs, Suffolk, Long Island, the two counties in Long Island, Nassau and Suffolk counties, and Westchester counties. So they didn't even touch Rockland County, which is Muncie. They didn't even touch that. Didn't touch New Jersey. Just those 8 areas. And the most, I guess, the bone crunching number that they came up with that they couldn't deny was that, again, something like 65% of all children under the age of 18 who identified as Jewish were Orthodox. The game is over.
Amazing.
That was
Susan,
the end of the game.
I'll be
And I
right back.
remember
I just have to go open the kitchen door to let some air in here.
Do I talk? I think we're waiting for our host. Who opened the door to the kitchen. I hope he's coming back. You're back.
The issue, hi, I'm back. The issue, the cat all set to go out. The issue of demographics in Israel, I heard an expression from, we've been here 29 years. Someone from the left, quote unquote, whatever that means, said, we have the B'tei Avot, the old age homes. You have the high schools. Meaning,
Yeah, the kindergarten. No,
you have
you've got the kindergartens.
everything. When he had this was a problem for them, which is they saw let's distinguish between the books you show, the books that you show the IRS and the books you have in the back room. So whatever they may have said in their propaganda outlets like Haaretz, the Pravda of Israel, they had the real numbers for themselves. And they knew that the time is not with them. To the extent they want to destroy Israel as much as they can to get away with it before they're gone. And they've done a good job of causing a great deal of damage with the Oslo death process. They're gone, but the damage is behind. That's the whole point. They're gone. That's also I wanted to ask about the press in Yiddish. It would seem to me that because the Hasidim have so many children, that the number of papers or parsha sheets or anything in Yiddish, online or in print, should theoretically be increasing. Is it increasing in the Yiddish reading press? Is that occurring?
It's very interesting. I don't have data on that, but I will tell you that a lot of the Yiddish-speaking world, certainly in the United States, is also an English-speaking world.
Very interesting.
Their children speak English. You can go into any of the stores and people are speaking. They may throw in Yiddish words with you, but they're reading and speaking English. And increasingly, their children are going to college.
This
now,
is
they're
very
not
good.
They're not majoring in basket weaving. They're not majoring in gender studies. What they are majoring in are things that they can go out and use and be and work with, so that you'll have one of the most amazing success stories is Touro College, which for many years was sort of, well, it's there, it's this, it's that. It's just burgeoning.
Amazing.
You know, you're not going to go there again if you want to major in basket weaving. But if you want to go to medical school, you'll get into medical. They prepare their kids. You're going to take your MCATs. You want to go to law school. You want to be an accountant. You want to be a teacher. And you will go there. You will get what you need. Sometimes you can get out faster because they have nothing against accelerating. You want to do it. They're not there solely because they want to soak you for every dime they can get. It's an amazing success story. There was a time when YU Yeshiva University has always had kind of its trouble deciding whether it's more yeshiva or more university. God bless them. The demographics, by the way, are deciding that for them. I think many of you may know that there was I won't even call it a scandal, certainly an issue when YU decided to jump with both feet into the homosexual communities
Yes,
agenda.
yes, yes.
They could not fill their auditorium with YU kids. They had no trouble filling their auditorium, remembering YU is in New York, and they had people coming from Philadelphia and everywhere else. They were able certainly to fill an auditorium because it was opening, and it was a story, an Orthodox school that had this kind of a program. The part that shocked me the most out of that was not the fact that they had the program was one thing. The Rosh Yeshivas at Yeshiva University came out against this program. The Rosh Yeshivas came out to a man, every one of them, and told their Talmud and told their students, this is not the place for you to go. This is not what we want to see happening. We're opposed to this. And the YU newspaper ran an editorial, people commenting, the Rosh Yeshivas are entitled to their opinion. And the minute that was said in print by kids at YU, I became convinced that Turo had paid them to do it because I said this is going to increase. And of course, I mean, it wasn't only that statement, but it was all kinds of things that were happening that people said, we can't do it. YU has been building itself back, but there has been a way to come back because we dress as the Western world, we engage in the professions of the Western world. But I've often said when people ask me, can I define modern Orthodox? And my answer is we're the same as any other Orthodox, except that we send our kids to college and we say a prayer for the state of Israel. And aside from that, what we are doing is basically what anybody else does. And our sentiments are not that far removed. How do we know that? The 2016 election told us a great deal. For years and years, the gospel, according to the Democrats, were that, and probably true, was that 85% of the Jewish community, defined however you want, votes Democrat. I once wrote an editorial and I said, for a smart people, we have put ourselves in the stupidest position. It means the Democrats can afford to take you for granted and the Republicans can afford to write you off, which, as you remember, is exactly what happened in the administration with the first George Bush.
Yes.
When it was famously said, blank the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway.
Yes.
Now you can scream and say, oh my God, it was a statement of truth. Shame, it was true. You may not like it. Is it anti-Semitic? Well, but it's true. Maybe 15% did or didn't. It was crazy. There was voting for Donald Trump, and this is because of the demographics. 30% of the Jewish community, almost 1/3, voted for Donald Trump. Why? Who voted for Donald Trump? 85% of the Orthodox community across the board. Whether we're talking about modern Orthodox, whether we're talking about Hasidim, one way to the other. Jews voted, about 85% voted for Trump, and people said, and I think in 2020 it was even higher. It was even higher than 85%. This was something that as I say, you can talk about anything you want, but it was very clear that the percentage of Jews who were voting Republican had more than doubled. And there is no reason to think that is not going to continue. Of course, people can self-identify as Jewish. You'd be amazed at the people who tell you that they're Jewish, because it's all self-identification. Um, However they do it, the Orthodox community is growing by leaps and bounds. You just can't have numbers like this. The numbers will show you. The number of children, and we don't lose our, there's some drop-off rate, but it's insignificant. A survey was done by the Board of Jewish Education, interesting survey, in the late, and probably just about 2000, in which they were looking to see who was intermarrying. If you sent your kids to a public school, at that point, it's gone up since then, the percentage of intermarried Jews, the chance of your child intermarrying was 60%. Now, you could be part of the lucky 40%, but 60% of Jewish kids who went to public high schools intermarried. If you were an observant Jewish family, and you were an observant Shomer Shabbos kosher family, and you sent your kids to a Jewish day school, yeshiva, Jewish day school, and the kid graduated from 12th grade, the chance of intermarriage was 1 to 2%. Horrible for that 1 to 2%, statistically insignificant. Think about, I mean, when you think about your own, you turn around in almost any of these communities where we would know, because they're tight-knit communities, do you know of anybody who intermarried? And you almost come up with nothing. If you were, as they defined it, a conservative Jew, and that usually meant belonging to a conservative synagogue, and, big and, you sent your kids to a Jewish high school and the kid graduated from 12th grade. The chance of intermarriage was 5 to 6%. If you were, as they defined it, reform meaning you were really doing nothing. You might belong to a synagogue, you might not, but for some reason, you sent your kids to a Jewish day school, community school, whatever. You sent your kids to a Jewish day school, and the kid graduated from 12th grade. And the percentage of intermarriage was 15%, which was about what it was in the 1950s. So what you were talking about, what became the deciding factor? The deciding factor were Jewish high schools, not after-school programs, not youth groups, Jewish high schools, and your kid graduated from 12th grade. It's the deciding factor. That's what I've heard, and I'm sure you have, in America, parents who will say, oh, I'm sending my child to a Jewish nursery school because I want them to have something. I want them to have a background. And then they're going to send them to a public school. The answer is save your money. Don't bother. Mm-hmm. It doesn't even matter if you just send them to Jewish elementary school, unless that Jewish elementary school is the diving point to go into a jumping off point to go to Jewish high school. If what you're doing is looking to preserve something. I've often said we should be out on bended knees asking Jews to send their kids to Jewish high schools. Send them to a Jewish high school. Jewish high schools, make yourselves user-friendly. I don't care how many tracks you're going to have. I don't care what you're going to have. Make yourselves user-friendly. One of my favorite quotes came, I'm sure you've heard of it, named after the Kushner family, the Kushner yeshiva, which goes from preschool through high school. When it first opened in Livingston, after they had several versions of the school. I once spoke to the principal, and I liked what he said so much to me when I spoke to him that I put it on my wall. He said, Kushner is a very elitist school. We take only Jewish children.
How much?
I wanted a kid.
Susan, what is the price range? Say a person says, okay, I want to do that. How much does a high school cost these days? That's
got to become, it's so high that it's ridiculous. It has got to become our communal responsibility. We need those Jewish schools more than we need the JCCs. They throw money into the JC, and I'm not putting down the JCCs. They have wonderful programs and they're fine, and I think they should continue to be tax deductible, and you can give
Right.
charity to them. But God, we have two major communal responsibilities in all fundraising. One is to Israel. We have whatever it is that we're doing, because that's where our money is going. I once tracked something, and the small amount that was going because of administration costs could make you nauseous. But
Right.
the other one has got to be day schools.
What's the price range now
It means
for a day school?
all of us should be doing what? We should be all of us, because it's a matter of communal survival. We should all be voting for people who are going to work for school vouchers, school choice. It's good for us. It's good for everybody in the country. Anybody who says that parents don't know which are the best schools for their children, which is what they say about the minority community. And I have never heard a more racist statement in my life. The idea of trapping poor families in failing schools because we don't think those parents know anything is outrageously disgusting.
But
No one knows better where a child should be in school than his or her parents, and nobody knows which school is best for that child, and to assume otherwise is simply an outrage, which is what, by the way, the teachers union does. They assume that poor parents who may not have had an education themselves cannot decide what is best for their children.
But you know,
we need it for survival, but so does the rest of America.
You know, my father had his law practice in the South Bronx, 149th Street, 3rd Avenue since 1952. So his clientele was the Hispanic and Black communities. And at the age of 4 in 1960, I was in both the Spanish and Puerto Rican Day parades. Spanish meaning Cuban. They wanted to say, like the German Jews, you know, we're superior to the Polish Jews. So we're not Cubans, we're Spanish, and you can shine our shoes if we're in a good mood. They knew perfectly well where to send their kids. They sent them to parochial schools because the nuns and the priests wouldn't put up with any BS. They got disciplined and learned how to read, write, and add and subtract.
Lowell, now when you look in these communities, it's the same gene pool. The public schools and the Catholic schools have the same gene pool. The Catholic kids graduate, Catholic schools graduate. They don't care if their families are Catholic or not. The Catholic schools graduate their kids go to college, their kids will have jobs, their kids are, what is the one thing that they really, really want to drive home? Don't have a baby until you're married, ladies.
Right.
Because if you want to know statistically what will prevent you from being successful,
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, my father saw a lot of that in the Black community. Kids ended up on the streets. In the Spanish-speaking community, somehow there was an abuela, grandma somewhere, someone somewhere. Kids someone took care of them somewhere. It was just not part of the culture that they'd be on the street. This is before the drugs started in the 1960s. So also the cost for it's a big scandal for the phony public school system, which is a tsunami level disaster in the United States and here too, that for a fraction of the cost, the priests and the nuns produced a better result. And it's not just because the nuns and the priests were paid less. The whole system was structured for production, not for wallpaper and paying a lot of fat cat, scalawag and carpetbagging managers in the system. Now I want to ask you a question. So let's go back to right now, in, let's say, the metropolitan New York area. If I was there and I want to send my kids to a Jewish day school, let's leave out the issue of the state paying for part of it. What's the price range that I'm looking at?
Okay. And I again, when you talk about what the state's going to pay, you can be talking, if you're talking about some of the elitist schools, you could be talking, and you know what they are, and anybody who wants to look at them here, most of them are the large co-ed schools, very successful. I mean, I'd be shocked if it's not a 100% graduation rate, and these kids go on to, some of them go on to the finest schools in the country. Remind me to talk to you about that in a second. But they certainly are going on to four-year schools. You could be talking about anywhere between $25,000 and $30,000 a year per kid. However, it's not your only option. And I mean, there are other options. For a while, one of the most amazing things came out of all places, Highland Park, New Jersey. Highland Park, New Jersey is in central New Jersey, wonderful Jewish community, wonderful, growing, vibrant community, just outside New Brunswick, fabulous community. There was a woman there who came up with an idea. She got herself a grant to do it. Her idea was she was going to do a hybrid between using the tools and methods of homeschooling, but make it as a Jewish school, recognizing that the expensive part of the secular education is not the religious element. That's not what you can get a rabbi, you can get kids, and you can teach them, and you can get them with various, and you're fine. The part that is really expensive is the secular education. Because those are teachers who are used to a better salary, and you may need all kinds of utensils. What she started doing was that part of it, the secular part of the education, was built around the computer. Kids stopped carrying, sometimes I see my grandchildren lugging books, and I get frightened for their backs. I mean, it's crazy. This was a school in which everything was online. The heavy books were all in their laptops. Kids came in, and you had an adult supervising, because kids would do whatever they wanted, but it was done online. The English program was based on the great books. Kids were reading. Math was done on some of the best homeschooling programs I have seen. She made arrangements with some of the public schools for science so they could use their labs. They did have a Hebrew component and a Jewish component. And are you ready for you had to buy your own computer. So aside from the computer, the cap was $5,000 a year per kid.
Amazing.
It did not succeed. Why? Because the woman who did it made one terrible, terrible mistake. Terrible mistake. She didn't recognize in the Jewish community, you're not going to do anything for the Jewish community without the work and cooperation of the local Vod. We need our rabbis. We need our rabbis because we trust them. This is not a bad thing. We all know there are rabbis. Everybody can come up with rabbis who did. But I'm talking about as a group for what they do. We need to be able to, we do trust our rabbis. We do trust them. This is a lady who should have gone to them and should have said, I have an idea. Help me. What do you want me to do? What do I need to do with this so that it meets your approval? What can we do to make sure that you can say to your congregants, this is a place where you can send your children. I'm supervising it. I know what they're doing. She didn't do that because her feeling was, that if I build a better mousetrap, they're going to come. And many things that's true, but not in the Orthodox community when it comes to our kids. And she could not attract enough people to send their children to a Jewish day school who were not in the Orthodox community. Solomon Schechters are closing left and right. Many of the Solomon Schechters that stay afloat are staying afloat because members of the Orthodox community are sending their kids there for one reason or another. The Orthodox community is the community that is using the day schools. There are a few exceptions and there are random things that happen, but by and large, this is the engine, the Orthodox community, modern Orthodox, whatever. We are the engine that is keeping those schools afloat. There is no reason why somebody else can't take this idea
Right. Susan, what about in terms of Jewish journalism, the switch from print? I mean, when people, I say to someone, I want to write something down, I say, I'll take out my smartphone and I take out a piece of paper and a pen. Because as I say to them, what I don't need a stupid box, which is what I call their smartphones, because I have no need to be connected all the time. I'm not a doctor, a nurse, or a policeman who's on call for an emergency. What's so important that I can't wait till I get to a computer? I realize kids who are brought up with it would not be able to relate to that. So in the old days, we had, Gutenberg print and paper and ink or parchment or something. To what extent does that still exist anymore?
Lowell, when I'm convinced that in the, what are we talking about, 1500s, when print, when Gutenberg had his,
I think it's 1453. I'm thinking.
That's 15th century.
I think.
I am convinced that there were people who said, I don't know if it's not written on parchment. Are you really reading? If it's not handwritten, I don't know. Is it? I'm sure there were people who said that. I'm a dinosaur. I like the feel of a book. However, I have no problem. I mean, the problem with a Kindle is that you can't, electronically, you can't read it on Shabbos. But
Okay.
so I've had people get around by saying, well, on Shabbos, you're not supposed to be reading that anyway. We have the books for that, the stuff that the casual reading, you don't have to do on Shabbos. I'm not opposed to the idea of the same words being available electronically. To me, it's an advance. As someone who's
My question is, are people,
as someone whose shelves are teeming, there is something very appealing about knowing that you can't ever lose it because it's a chip, and on your little smartphone, I can have 15,000 books.
agreed. But are people willing to pay for it? Are people willing to pay for it?
I can find them easier. No, but I can find them easier because all I have to do, I don't have to say, where's my copy of Dickens' Tale of Two Cities? But
all my work now is online. My question is, are people willing to pay for it?
And I can find it.
Agreed. Information storage and retrieval is much better electronically. But in terms of market for Jewish newspapers, are people still willing to pay for a subscription to a printed newspaper?
The answer to that is, again, it depends on the demographic.
Right.
The secular Jewish newspapers, fading fast.
Really?
Fast.
Oh.
They're not reading. The New York Jewish Week. New York Jewish Week is all online now.
Oh.
The Forward is all online now.
Oh,
Nowhere
I
else.
see.
They're not buying them. They're not touching them because they're online. The Orthodox Jewish papers are still coming out in print, and they're growing because people read them on Shabbos.
Right.
They're weeklies, and I guess, and it becomes a very comfortable time to.
Right. We have a subscription to Makori shown in print because on Shabbat, also to help a local business, but on Shabbat, they have a lot of nice feature stories. They have wonderful feature stories. All the news, whatever that means, I've already gotten online. In many cases from sources that most people never heard of. But
many of us who remember the revolution, I'm going to call it that, the revolution, when Arutz Sheva first came out.
Yes.
Arutz Sheva was born on my dining room table.
Really? Wow, that's a story.
Arutz Sheva was born because people from Beit El, whom I supported, saw what I was doing with my newspaper, and their first inclination was, why don't we put out a newspaper? And I said, a newspaper is fine, it's working for me, a news magazine, whatever you want. But I said, can you imagine if you did it by radio? My gosh, all people would have to do, and the question, of course, in Israel was, it's not like it is here in America, where if you want to do a radio station, you get yourself sponsors, and you do. In Israel, you have government control, which made me crazy.
Right.
So if you remember, they took a page out of A.B. Nathan's
Facebook. Yes, I remember.
And they went offshore, and of course, your left-wing government at the time was rating them. We're 3 miles. 3 miles not enough. You better be 5 miles, 10 miles. And I think at one point, when they were really doing it from inside, they actually did. They several times. Shlomo Aloni ordered the destruction of the ship. I mean, it was a definitely communication war. And my answer is, if you try to shut Jews up, it doesn't work, especially when we're talking to other Jews. So what Ruth Sheva did very early was it went online.
Right, I see what you mean. Yes.
When the internet revolution came, and people were scrambling. What are we going to do? How they were there. They were there, and it was working. It was like it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "You." I mean,
it's amazing.
Maybe you believe in the God of coincidences. It's okay.
Well, in physics, it's called its common name is serendipity. In physics, it's called synchronicity, and we'd call it hashgachat pratit, which, of course, we believe in. So, I mean, if a person is a religiously oriented Jew, or I think anyone, if you really believe there's a creator who has that nothing can happen in the universe that God doesn't permit for reasons known only to himself. Why I put it that way is because, as my father said, hard cases make bad law. And when you're dealing with extreme evil, it gets very touchy to say, well, it happened because God wanted it to happen. Like the Shoah, say, wait a minute. Let's just say, with paradox, you're reaching the limits of logic. Nothing can happen that God doesn't permit for reasons known only to himself. So there's no randomness, but that's different from saying, well, you see that. You know what I'm talking about, where all that kind of thinking goes.
As my granddaughter said to me at one point, one of my wonderful granddaughters said, Grandma, we're looking at a tapestry, and all we see is the back. And from the back of the tapestry, all we see are knots and tangles, and it looks like a bloody mess.
Right.
And we don't see the front of the tapestry, which makes sense. I don't understand it. You don't understand it. But then I couldn't tell what the picture is from the back of a tapestry either.
Well, one of the things Maimonides said, and then I have one question before we conclude our first, I hope we'll have more chance to talk to each other, is that the prophets speak about the Yemot Mashiach. Some of the things they say, even with the Mefarshim, are not clear. He said it won't be until we're flying through that cloud or we landed at Ben Gurion Airport and look back that we'll understand, oh, that's what it meant. That's what happened. Also, because the way in which it will happen depends on there are 8 billion humans on the planet, with 8 billion thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, all constantly interacting on the tactical level. So Hashem has strategically says, okay, this is the plan. You're coming to the airport, you're going up the mountain, if it's this road, that road, but as it's worked out, in terms of predestination and free will on the tactical level, it seems to us, yeah, okay, we have free will in terms of...
Aryeh, one of my most recent articles, I ask my readers to do 3 things for me. So I don't usually ask you to do anything. I'm asking you to do 3 things for me. And right now, in 2021, I want every single Jew to make sure your passport is in order. You should have your passport, all of your children's, infants, newborns, everybody needs an up-to-date passport, 1. 2, I want you to keep your eyes and ears open at all times. You can never, ever, ever close them. 3rd, in your mind, at least, maybe beyond that, but certainly starting in your mind, you start formulating the ideas for plan B.
Right. I think that's go on,
I said one could argue that a Jew should have to do that. That's not a bad idea for Jews anywhere at any time outside of Israel.
Right.
One could argue that. But right now, with what's happening in the United States, anybody who is not adhering to these 3, and I call them pleas, that I'm putting out
Right.
is not paying attention to Jewish history.
Right.
If you're not, you have to we have to pay attention to Jewish history. History did not start this morning at breakfast. History
Right.
started, we have to keep our eyes open.
Yes.
We know where things go. And
Yeah.
start passports, everybody, passport in order. Eyes and ears open at all times. You cannot afford to
Right.
make believe everything is just okay. Can't do it.
Right.
I mean, that's the story about people who say, God will take care of me. God
Right.
is sending you the information.
Right. Right. Right.
Sending you the information. And the third, plan B. And you know what it's going to be. It becomes much less scary, much less scary when you are thinking, okay, I know where I want to go. I couldn't believe the amount of building that's going on in Israel. Somebody knows something. The building is mind-boggling.
Right.
My family is doing it. My family is doing it. Have a place. We know what we're doing.
So
Are we watching? I know what my benchmark is. It could change. Right now for me, the benchmark will be when, and I say when because I'm expecting it any time, when the American Congress votes to tweak the First Amendment. It's coming.
Right.
When they tweak the First Amendment, when they're going to put it in the most happy terms, they're going to say, we're going to outlaw hate speech.
Right.
The problem with outlawing hate speech is that this conversation you and I are having could be designated hate speech. It could be designated hate speech, and then as an old-time liberal, my answer to hate speech is more speech. We're not talking about incitement. Kill you put in the blank, that we don't allow that.
Right.
Short of that, I don't want to hear, oh, that's a dog whistle, because your dog whistle isn't my dog whistle.
Right. So you know what? Let's conclude our first session on those prescient remarks. I hope we will have more conversations. And let me give the concluding remarks Dr. Glassman would give. I have to give because he's doing that root canal. So we on behalf of our viewers and listeners worldwide, we want to thank Mrs. Susan Rosenbluth, the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of the Jewish Voice and Opinion in TNAC.
Also available online at
It's in the link will be included with the video when it comes out, as well as Susan's email address. We want to thank Mrs. Rosenbluth, Susan, for taking the time to talk with us, and we hope we will be talking again. And
make sure when you give my email address, you give it to the one at Susan@JewishVoiceAndOpinion.com.
Yeah, I have that. I chose that one rather than the one from the university. And again, where are we? When are we? Today is Sunday, May 23rd, 2021 in the Gregorian calendar, and the 12th of Sivan, 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. And we look forward to seeing Susan again. So thank you very much. And Shavua Tov to all of us in Israel and everywhere. Thank you very much.